were the only thing left available to them with that repulsive, repugnant regime of Afrikaners there. And it's the only way they have. They've tried everything for the last 20 years. They begged, they borrowed, they crawled. And now they're taking up arms. The second thing, progress toward peace requires a timetable. Timetable, elimination of apartheid. What's our timetable? What are we saying to that repugnant... It says continue the same. We put no timetable on. We make no specific demand. We don't set it down. I'm ashamed that's our policy. That's what I'm ashamed of. I'm ashamed of the lack of moral backbone to this policy.
The issue on the Anglophone piece, I won't go into detail on that. I think the article plus the video this morning did a very good job of explaining the history of how it got to the point where we are.
First, I want to, first of all, thank the U.S. President-elect. That was the former Senator of the United States speaking against the apartheid regime in South Africa. Many of you may not be fully aware, but many of you have heard about Nelson Mandela that was forcefully in jail for 27 years in South Africa by the apartheid regime. So the outspoken senator against the apartheid regime was the current U.S. president now. So it is quite amazing that it's not by mistake that we happen to find him in the leadership, in the helm of this most amazing nation on the planet. The people of Southern Cameroon, or the people of Ambazonians, we are a nation of our own origins, but we were deprived of our existence by the power that be. And you know who they are: France, Great Britain, and you name the rest. But I am so indebted to the United States to take the helm of this crisis on full-heartedly on this question of Southern Cameroon. The people of Southern Cameroon shouldn't have experienced this crisis. By virtue of the United Nations Article 1514, after post-World War II, it was unanimously agreed that decolonization should be the ultimate goal, and that territory that were under the colonial Allied force should be decolonized. So Southern Cameroon meet those criteria for decolonizations. There was a bias. There was a bias of the British government. Ignored this fundamental act of decolonizations and brought to the people of Southern Cameroon in this current mess that we find ourselves. I am here to remind the world that before we come to the former African commander speaking about the atrocity going on in Southern Cameroon, but before I point to that, today, as I'm speaking, within the last 72 hours, let me bring La République top military officials.
Autour de la table, le rappel des règles d'engagement et d'ouverture du feu. À en croire l'analyse de ces officiers, le profil des miliciens séparatistes a radicalement changé en 3 ans. Les militants indépendants...
Let me be clear. Let's listen briefly.
Est-ce que vous avez compris? Voilà. Juste une petite exaction viendra gâter tout le travail que nous avons fait. On reste professionnel jusqu'au bout.
Autour de la table, le rappel des règles d'engagement et d'ouverture du feu. À en croire l'analyse de ces officiers,
There is one thing that I wanted to clarify. because they use language in order to create the mission in which they are intended to. So they call the people of Southern Cameroon a separatist. There is a great distinction. I want to be clear. There is a great distinction between separatists. The word they use, separatists. We cannot be a separatist when we don't have any agreement with La République du Cameroon. Who are we separating from? There is a great distinction. When the littoral province or Western province or Grand North choose to leave La République du Cameroon, that is what is called a separation or separatist. But when the people of Southern Cameroon choose to leave La République du Cameroon, that is not separatist. We own our right and privilege to leave La République at what time we choose to. Because we came into this, what they call a wedding, which there was never a marriage certificate. We had our own sovereign identity, that La République was not part of Southern Cameroon. La République in 1960 got their independence under the initiative of France. People of Southern Cameroon was not part of that document. And so Southern Cameroon in 1961, La République was not part of the document. So that is a cutting limit. So the fact that they use words in order for them to foster their own egoistic belief system, that is what I am bringing out here, pointing out. We are not separatists. We are not secessionists. We are people that we have chosen to leave La République because we will never have any compromise agreement. There were never an agreement. Of course, what they describe as the 1972 or what they call the so-called the Fuman, whatever they call, there was never a universal agreement that came in. Instead, France use the Fumban women to instigate the people of Southern Cameroon, and they forget what they actually went for the occasion for. Because France knew that they have no mandate. But the mineral deposit in Southern Cameroon, that is what is their priority. That they were more interested in the mineral deposit. So let's look for another way around. The Biafra, as what is now called in Nigeria. In 1960, when the British government tabled Nigeria to the United Nations recognition per Article 1514 of Decolonization Act, Biafra were part of Nigeria. That does not mean that they cannot, if there is an evidence of military crackdown, the people have the right to file for divorce with Nigeria, irrespective of whether they were part of the territorial integrity of Nigeria. But the people of Southern Cameroon do not fall in that category. The people of Southern Cameroon, recognized by the United Nations as a sovereign entity, going with La République under the same power and strength. But it shouldn't have even happened in the first place. Should British government were fair enough to respect their own terms and respect the rule of the game. Instead, they were biased on the people of Southern Cameroon and gave us a lesser opportunity. Do you choose to join La République as a sovereign nation to join La République, or a sovereign nation to join Nigeria? Why not the third option? And that is what the most powerful person that has ever stood was Abe Wabamoko. Maybe his name may not be popular, but that's the name I admire him. He says the third option, and that is why he was hunted by the French regime, La République du Cameroon, Amadou Ahidjo. He's several times imprisoned in La République. As the current leader now are being imprisoned, the current member of our own group, member of Southern Cameroon, like Tabi Ayog and the rest, being imprisoned by La République du Cameroon. They have no mandate whatsoever to arrest and detain. By virtue of the law, both agree citizens of La République can never be tried in Southern Cameroon, whereas the citizens of Southern Cameroon can never be tried by La République. So in what mandate does La République have the mandate to try our citizens in La République du Cameroon? Of course they do not. And that is why they instituted a divide and rule system where every positions in Southern Cameroon are being headed by a francophone. The governors, the divisional officers, and every military commander are all francophones. As you can listen to them speaking, it's a clear example. Right now that I am speaking, within the last 72 hours, there is 500 persons missing between Mutengene, Buea, Likumba, and Tiko Road. As I'm speaking live now, so within the last 72 hours in Southern Cameroon, 500 people have been missing as I'm speaking. This is not something that I'm making up. At least close to 500 persons are nowhere to be found in Southern Cameroon. And it's what the so-called La République system, in the French word, Kalle Kalle. In a French word they call Kalle Kalle. There is a discernment of what the so-called the Kalle Kalle in between this area, Tiko, Buea, Mutengene, likumba. And at least close to 500 persons are nowhere to be found by the very brutal regime. I will expect them, after listening to the U.S. Secretary of State mentioning in his hearing confirmation, they would have called their military occupation in Southern Cameroon. Of course, it's not where to stop. As I'm speaking right now, as I'm speaking, within the last 72 hours, close to 500 families are nowhere to be found in Southern Cameroon, between Tiko, Buea, Mutengene, likumba, within this area. There is something wrong in this picture. I mean, the people of Southern Cameroon do not want to live together with La République du Cameroon. That is what it is clear. And I am making my mind straight clear. The people of Southern Cameroon do not want to live together with La République du Cameroon. I don't know why the world believe that the people of Southern Cameroon must live under the umbrella of a foreign nation. You know why? Victoria, where the mineral deposit is, because the French regime are more interested in the mineral deposit in Southern Cameroon. That is what they are interested about. The mineral deposit that will be transported and shipped. As I'm speaking, with the crisis going on, the French government are busy digging pipeline to drain crude oil to Douala, to Kribi, so that they can be shipped to France. There is something actually wrong. What is wrong with black race? That France must be glued onto the people of Southern Cameroon. We don't need France. France can occupy its French colony because they are dogs. They can follow them at any how. But we will not be part of those rubbish. Okay, stay tuned. Listen to them. Listen to them. How they're planning to invade Southern Cameroon in every angle. Say professional. Listen to them.
Le profil des miliciens séparatistes a radicalement changé en 3 ans. Les militants indépendantistes du début ayant peu à peu cédé la place à des seigneurs de guerre.
La perception que nous avons, c'est que ce combat identitaire n'existe presque plus. Parce que bien avant, vous aviez des militants, des populations qui se levaient avec des drapeaux qui disaient nous voulons notre indépendance. Mais aujourd'hui, ça n'existe plus. Il n'y a plus de leader véritablement.
You listen. That's their propaganda, that the leaders are not where to be found. We are here in the United States, and we are here to pursue our goal. And our goal and our objective is to get rid of Francophone out of Southern Cameroon completely. Of course, they're using their propaganda that the leader, they ne sont pas plus. Where our people must leave La République du Cameroon. We cannot, in any circumstances, live with harmony with La République du Cameroon. We cannot in any way live in harmony. Those are the stupid regime that they just follow. Can you imagine this individual? Let's bring his image. That is the president of the Francophones. That is the president. He is 89 years old or 88 or 89 years old. He doesn't remember his wife's name. He doesn't remember his children's name. He doesn't remember his room that he came out. He's suffering from mental deprivations. He is singly monitored closely by the wife. He doesn't remember his room. He doesn't remember his office. So there is constantly using him as a robotic machine and traveling in every part of the presidency of a Tudi. His memory is incoherent. And the wife closed the gap or the deficit and make sure that no one is aware of the deficit. And he's just being closely monitored like a robotic machine. And he has been in power for 38 years. Just imagine how many presidents were elected in the United States in 38 years. Imagine he is being implanted there by the French regime because they find access to the raw material in which he gave them free access. And that is why France will never oppose any person to replace him. So long as he has granted France free access, he can be there till millions of years. Even after his dead body, he will still be the president of that Francophone regime. Our people don't believe in that right. We don't believe in that right. And that is why we cannot in any circumstances live together with La République du Cameroon. We must have our own government in Southern Cameroon that existed. We are a democratic institution that existed. Let me bring our member of our democratic institution.
Supporting the fight for democracy, whether it's in failed authoritarian states like Venezuela, or it's in Putin's Russia, or it's elsewhere in the world. You know my long concern for Africa. There was just a deeply flawed election in Uganda, where Museveni has again held on to power in no small part by engaging in a blatant disregard for human rights. There are other countries. The violence in the Tigray region, in Sudan, on the other hand, where there's been a...
I'm sorry, that's the U.S. Secretary of State speaking, but I have to interrupt. You know, on my left, that is Dr. Endele, the first Prime Minister elected in Southern Cameroon. Dr. Endele, the first elected Prime Minister. On my next left is the Prime Minister, Jongo Foncha, elected in Southern Cameroon. Third on the line is Joa, the Prime Minister, duly elected in Southern Cameroon. Since La République creation, there have never been any elected officials in that dog-yard country, the so-called La République du Cameroon. There has never a democratic. You have previously Amadou Ahidjo, that was there, implanted by French regime. Amadou Ahidjo was implanted by the French regime, abolished a democratic institution that was initially supposed to develop. And French used guillotine. France used guillotine, killed the essential political party in La République that was intended to demonstrate a democratic institution in La République du Cameroon. That political party was disbanded. What the so-called, now they call the UPC.
The elections in Uganda.
The current one, the so-called the UPC, is a disrupting system. But the previous one they called, they want a political structure. And the goal and their objective was against the French colonialism. And that is why the guillotine was instituted. Guillotine is a form of execution that was introduced in France by Louis XVI. That was a form of a forceful execution in France by Louis XVI. And after that, that became the French symbol of guillotine, and that they extended to La République du Cameroon in the 60s and 50s. Because of the UPC intended to persuade a democratic institution in the French. And that is why France instituted that guillotine, and there was a massacre, bloody massacre in the French system. Most of them, guess what? Most of them escaped to Southern Cameroon territory, where we provide them asylum. So now we are becoming the guillotine by the very colonial people that we gave them an opportunity to live. What a diabolical coefficient. It is an absurd that we housed La République during the French invasion and massive execution of La République. Now we become the guillotine because we are in a world of destruction. You have the British government that their mindset is the worst than you can ever think of. While we are fighting against our sovereignty, the British government is more interested in negotiating with mineral deposit, how they can exploit. There is something incoherently wrong with this British government. There is something special. Let me bring it.
Madam Deputy Speaker, just 5 days before the US Senate was attacked, they came together to approve a resolution co-sponsored by 20 senators from both parties, from Marco Rubio to Cory Booker. And it was about this, about the brutal campaign of subjugation by the French-speaking government in Cameroon against the country's English-speaking minority. The Senate resolution condemned with great force the atrocities committed by the Anglophone separatist militias, and it speaks with equal power about the actions of the Cameroon government, including, I quote, torture and sexual abuse, massacres and burnings of villages, use of live ammunition against protesters, arbitrary arrests and unlawful detention, forced disappearance and deaths in custody, attacks on journalists and the regular killing of civilians, including women, children and the elderly. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Senate resolution noted approvingly that exactly 1 year before, the Office of the US Trade Representative, remember this is Donald Trump's trade representative, the direct counterpart of the Secretary of State for International Trade, had terminated Cameroon's access to preferential trade rights due, I quote, to persistent gross violations of internationally recognised human rights. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, in that same spirit, the Senate resolution urged members of the international community to join the United States in a strategic collective effort to put pressure on the government of Cameroon, including through, I quote, the use of all available diplomatic and punitive tools. And I quote that Senate resolution at length, Madam Deputy Speaker, because I believe that we must ask ourselves what on earth those senators would think if they knew that on that very same day, when they were unanimously passing those strong words of condemnation towards the government of Cameroon and urging the international community to join them, here in the United Kingdom, we were bringing into effect a brand new continuity trade agreement with Cameroon, a trade deal which was agreed by ministers, apparently with no consideration and clearly no concern for the persistent gross violations of international human rights that are taking place inside Cameroon. A trade deal which none of us in this House, bar the ministers on the bench opposite, have even been allowed to read, let alone debate or approve, and a trade deal which may or may not contain provisions on human rights, but until the government finally decides to publish it, we, the elected members of this Parliament, simply cannot know. I hope that members on all sides will keep the example of Cameroon in mind and consider the words of the US Senate and the actions of the US Trade Representative when judging how to vote later on, because we all know that on occasions like this, when amendments are up for debate, ministers will try to persuade us that they don't disagree with the good intentions behind them and they just don't think that they're really required. However, if that is what ministers are saying today in relation to Amendments 2 and 3 on human rights, or 1 and 5 on parliamentary scrutiny, I would only ask members to remember Cameroon. A trade deal done with a regime which is slaughtering women and children just because they live in English-speaking towns. A trade deal done in the face of the US Senate on the same day that they called for international support. And a trade deal which, incredibly, has still not been laid before Parliament almost 3 weeks after it came into force. I would urge all members to think about the Cameroon deal and how little consideration ministers gave either to human rights or to the rights of this Parliament when they decided to sign it. And then finally ask yourself and ask your conscience whether you accept what those same ministers are saying when they go through the amendments before us today and tell you they're not really required.
In October of 2017, when it came kind of to a head, the Anglophone states said we want to actually form our own state, the Ambazonia state. There have been issues there with atrocities, issues with allegations of law of war issues, and this is something that brings all this to a head. Over the last several months or so, the State Department has put on hold several security force assistance programs. Right before the election in October, I, with the ambassador, went and paid a visit with President Buea, and we had a very direct conversation with him with regards to investigation of these atrocities, transparency of these atrocities, and appropriate battlefield behavior. Since that time, the State Department has made a decision not to allocate significant money But at the same time, they've released some money that's been on hold to things like Scan Eagle and Cessna aircraft that assist in the Boko Haram fight in the north. We still have programs that we continue with them, all kind of small engagements as well as exercises. We talked about the state partnership program with Nebraska. We put that on hold, and in conjunction with the ambassador, AFRICOM, we decided not to pursue that because it wouldn't have been a good place for that particular group to be, so we put a halt to that. So the bottom line is right now in Cameroon, they have been a good partner with us counterterrorism-wise, but you can't neglect the fact that they have there are alleged atrocities and what's going on there. And so we continue to take our cues from the State Department and from the ambassador, and our level of engagement will continue, but not get out ahead of what the State Department would say is if we have to take other actions. We were very emphatic with President Buea that the behavior of his troops, the lack of transparency, could have a significant impact on our ability to work with them.
Great.
Are politically, economically, and linguistically marginalised. And of course, the current period of escalating violence and displacement goes back to when lawyers protested.
"7,000 refugees from Cameroon registered with the UNHCR. Thousands more have been forced to flee their homes, and dozens of villages have been ethnically cleansed. According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and High Commissioner for Refugees, 437,000 from the Anglophone regions have been displaced, whilst the charity Protection Approaches says that 3.3 million are in need of humanitarian assistance. Amnesty reports that 450 to 500 civilians and 185 members of the security services have been killed. UNICEF estimates that 58 schools have been destroyed. 47 political leaders are being held without charge. And a recent Amnesty report refers to, and I quote, arbitrary arrests, torture, unlawful killings, and the destruction of property. The Catholic Bishops' Conference has called it, quote, inhuman, blind, monstrous violence. And of the October election, Archbishop Samuel Cleda, the president of the Bishops' Conference, says, one has the impression election results are decided before voting takes place. My lords, we can all share in these horrendous statistics, but what I want to do is this evening focus on what conclusions we can draw from the United Kingdom's dismal approach to this situation. More than ever, with Britain's potential departure from the European Union, we must seek to define our role in the world. And it would be helpful to know from the Noble Baroness the Minister whether, for instance, human rights issues were assessed before, for instance, the New Age natural gas deal was announced, what consideration has been given to targeted sanctions, and whether this crisis figures in the Foreign Secretary's recent commitment on atrocity prevention. My lords, the government mustn't suggest that this is a level playing field conflict in a civil war between equal sides. Too often in the past, in Bosnia, in Rwanda, in Darfur, the United Kingdom chose the path of moral equivalence, hinting that both sides are as bad as each other is the easy way out. In a previous generation, this was known as appeasement. Moral equivalence signals that we cannot be expected to pass judgment on which side is more to blame for the conflict. Instead, we issue the usual calls for a cessation of violence and a negotiated settlement, or we frame political conflicts as if they were natural disasters requiring aid, and we're very generous at sending aid rather than political solutions. At its worst, in Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur, we have portrayed the persecution of unarmed civilians by repressive governments as a result of ancient ethnic hatreds, thereby dehumanising the victims and denying the legitimacy of the protesters who yearn for the rights that we take for granted. By citing ancient ethnic hatreds, we absolve ourselves of the obligation under international law to stop the killing. It's also disingenuous to defend our tepid response by claiming that the circumstances present us with a simple binary choice between wringing our hands in dismay or putting British boots on the ground. This is to ignore the potential for soft power available to the international community, be it concerted and sustained diplomatic pressure, carefully targeted sanctions, or international justice. The grievances fueling the violence in Cameroon did not erupt overnight. We had plenty of warning, but we chose not to listen to Cameroon's Anglophone minority. Anglophones represent 20% of the population, but for years there was only one Anglophone member of the 36-person cabinet in Yaoundé, just one example of their systematic marginalisation. My lords, we shouldn't underestimate the influence we have, but it speaks volumes that we left it to the American ambassador to express his disapproval of the Cameroonian government's brutal response to peaceful protests. For decades, the Francophone government has ignored the pleas of moderate representatives of civil society, such as church leaders. Calls for a federal solution were ignored by President Buea, 36 years in power, fueling the calls for secession and thereby polarising opinion. Breaking point came when the Francophone government sought to impose French laws in the French language in Anglophone courts and sent Francophone teachers speaking French into English schools. They responded to peaceful protest with disproportionate force. The International Crisis Group reports that a government helicopter, for instance, hovered outside a church, shooting Anglophone worshippers as they emerged from Mass. Inevitably, disproportionate actions led to the current escalation. In the face of all this, my lords, there is nothing admirable about being even-handed in the face of the suffering of the Anglophone community. The United Kingdom should support the Anglophone community's peaceful civil society leaders in seeking genuine and inclusive talks. We need a targeted strategy for atrocity prevention and, my lords, a commitment to bring to justice those responsible for human rights violations wherever they occur.
My lords, I too would like to...
Whatever the circumstances, that is where we find ourselves. As you've seen all the key actors speaking about the ongoing atrocity in Southern Cameroon, the last speaker said that it did not occur in anything. That it happened has been systematically boiling over time. And yet the international community, as you listen to the previous British member of parliament, that while this crisis, while the US Senate resolutions are being adopted, the British government is planning a business deal with this neighboring country, La Republic du Cameroon. That is why they knew that the Anglo-Saxon way of life, in which they have built with the people of Southern Cameroon. So therefore, for them to be able to travel to Southern Cameroon and harvest the material, then they ought to transfer Southern Cameroon to La Republic du Cameroon with repressive French system. Then that will give them the guarantee that they can have access through the French system, because they know that it's a bargaining policy for them to be able to penetrate and disrupt and get the raw material in Southern Cameroon. That is why at the heart core of this crisis, the British government under Boris Johnson is busy negotiating business deal with the terrorist government of La Republic du Cameroon. Fundamentally ignored the people of Southern Cameroon, their right. It is quite devastating and amazing to see how the injustice the British government has over the years imposed upon the people of Southern Cameroon. And that is why you can now understand, you can deduce from your own personal perspective why they knew that Southern Cameroon cannot live an independent nation. You understand why Hong Kong cannot live an independent nation. Why would the British government believe that after living with Hong Kong for 150 years, and they should be able to live happily with the communists in China, my little child will be able to differentiate that living with my dad for a length of time, I should be able to be familiar with him, what he wants and what he doesn't. So British government expect the people of Hong Kong to be able to live happily with the communist China after 150 years that they have not been living together. They have been living separately with a different form of government, different form of policy, different form of system of education. It is completely ironically to believe that British government will have forcefully assumed that by joining China, they should be able to live happily. That's just creating another burden of wars they have spread around the world. And that is why the people of Southern Cameroon is not an exceptional case. It's almost in line with those similarities. If United States, some 200 years ago, says they cannot live together with British government, while British was across the ocean and able to control United States, the United States citizens said, no, we can't have this. You cannot be living across the ocean and claiming an ownership of a foreign nation. And they began to advocate for a sovereignty of the United States. I will believe that British government would have been well educated to understand that by now they shouldn't make those errors. But unfortunately, that is what they systematically carry out. Even though the citizens are advocating that the people of Southern Cameroon have the privilege and right to their own sovereign destination. Yet, it didn't occur that the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson could even reflect on his mind. He didn't even think that while he is persuading the UK to abandon the European Union, but he sees the people of Southern Cameroon as a unanimously glued to La Republique du Cameroon. It didn't have any contrast indication to even him to reflect, including his own entire cabinet. It is quite amazing, the paradoxical, how the European feel, especially the European Union. Of course, you cannot be fighting that you don't want to join the European Union. Even after joining the European Union, did you know what never joined the European Union? The British pound. The British currency never crossed to the European Union. British currency was still in place, even though they claimed that they are joining the European Union. So the British were very smart, and they believed that they can never give the British pound its status to the European control. But yet, they joined partially. But however, they see the people of Southern Cameroon that can be thrown into the dustbin of the French colonialism. That the people of Southern Cameroon, their brain has been washed away. So they can be able to manipulate and control at their wishes. Mr. Boris Johnson, that is not the Southern Cameroon that you thought to be. We are different people. We are different people. We are also reflective. We have brains and we have mindset and we think. We are not going to be that animals that could be dumb and then France can roll in and manipulate and control every aspect of our life. Even though the U.S. Secretary of State is speaking against the atrocity that is going on, La Republique military under the brutal regime abusing, as I'm speaking, at least 500 citizens of Southern Cameroon between Tiko, Buea, Mutengene, likumba are nowhere to be found. Are nowhere to be found. So they think what they carry out, we are not aware of what is going on in Southern Cameroon territory. The solution to the problem of crisis is to have La Republique live on their own territory and the people of Southern Cameroon live on their own territory. We can exchange goods and services as a good neighborliness. That is how we can live together with La Republique du Cameroon. We cannot live under the same bed, under the same room, under one roof, under the same umbrella with La Republique du Cameroon. So any nation that is making a mistake and thinking that by somehow they're going to glue us back together with La Republique, then you are making a mistake and wrong judgment. The first to solve the crisis is to look at what brought us together in the first place. Article 1514. Article 1514 of the United Nations did not ask for exceptional case on behalf of the people of Southern Cameroon. It called for decolonization. It did not ask for partial decolonizations. So we should have been decolonized. And that is the fundamental question. To resolve the crisis, people should not beat around the bush and driven around the way and come to think that the people of Southern Cameroon will be able to live together with La République du Cameroon. So we should live again under the same federal structure. That is the federal structure where within the past 50-something years has been dismantled by La République du Cameroon with the complicity of the French regime, because the mineral deposit in Southern Cameroon is a prerogative for them to harvest for their own self-egoistic interests and fed the French citizens, while the people of Southern Cameroon live on crumbs of bread. And the little herd of homes they have are being burned down to ashes. And they don't even have a place. The government of La République did not finance any minimum assistance to the people. They rushed by themselves, building a small hut with grass, leaves, and trees. And to have their little family loved ones they have. But yet, the brutal regime of La République du Cameroon is going around burning all those hurt. Can you imagine the feeling and the pain people are suffering? Southern Cameroon did not embrace this. The people of Southern Cameroon did not embrace this crisis. They did not embrace this, but it forced upon the people of Southern Cameroon by the power that be, and this colonialism. That is what is created this terrible life on the human being by the colonial power that be, and that is what our people are experiencing: indiscriminate. We are not a sovereign nation with its own government, with its own cabinet, are disappearing in the face of the earth because of injustice in this world we live in. I am sure we have a moment that we have a transition period in this planet Earth, and we have to make the environment a peaceful during our transitional period on this earth. No one is going to live permanently in this earth, but all one has a transitional period to be able to pass through. But the power that be has chosen the wrong morale because they predict what they think it is ought to be. And that is why the massive killing is going on in Southern Cameroon. That is why you will expect the British government to think clearly and reflectively that they committed atrocity on the people of Southern Cameroon by forcefully and giving that the two options, join Nigeria or this Makiza, La République du Cameroon. And the third option were opposed. Then that comes to the point of Waba Abemuko, prisoner without a crime, because he was speaking his mind. He couldn't see why an injustice was placed upon his own nation, ignore the fundamental principles by joining La République or Nigeria. He doesn't see why he couldn't stand alone. They have a government. At the time he was speaking, the government of Southern Cameroon, a prime minister, head of government, demonstrated the first of its kind in West Africa. British regime and the Francophones. But guess what? Africans, the mineral deposit was their top priority, not the indigenous people of Southern Cameroon. Southern Cameroon has demonstrated within the British administrative authority that they can elect a government. Endele, Foncha, and Dua, those were democratically elected people of Southern Cameroon, demonstrate their ability to be able to govern themselves, did not give any reflection to the British government that they should think, of course, historically, did not even mean anything to the British government, so long as their own interests were more prerogative, because they can have access to the mirror through a French-led government of La République du Cameroon, rather than through the people of Southern Cameroon, whom they have been living together for the past, after the post-World War II. The post-World War II, 1945, that ended the formation of the United Nations. The essence was to decolonize the territory. And that law specifically stated 1514. And yet, it didn't occur to them. But yet, they believed that, unfortunately, that the people of Southern Cameroon should live with a foreign nation, La République du Cameroon. This is the nightmare that has brought us this mess. When you look below, that's the vote at the United Nations. Overwhelmingly, United Nations officials voted to recognize the sovereignty of the people of Southern Cameroon. But yet, they couldn't allow it to materialize. And that is the nightmare. As I'm speaking, at least 500 people are missing in Southern Cameroon. One will expect them to sit up and listen, to pay close attention to the U.S. Undersecretary in his confirmation hearing, describing the crisis in Southern Cameroon. One will expect La République du Cameroon to be able to sit up and think about and reflect. Within the last 72 hours, 500 persons are missing in Southern Cameroon by the continued invasion. They have what is so called in the French language, Kalle Kalle. That is what people get up early morning in Tiko, Mutengene, Buea, likumba, and found the whole of their environment surrounded by the military regime of Buea. There was no access for them to go. And that is why the 500 people are now found missing completely. They don't know where to be found. And in this nightmare, UK is still interested. None of them, the key cabinet member, has spoken openly like the United States counterpart. Instead, in member of the UK Parliament speaking about the ongoing crisis, yet the executive cabinet of the UK led by Boris Johnson, of course, you can know who he is. You can understand exactly who he is. He cannot even talk about it. His cabinet, blindfoldly, as previous before, think that African race is just animals as they think. And so it doesn't want the UK Prime Minister to even mention about the people of Southern Cameroon. Of course, their material is what interested them. But the people living in that environment is of none value to them, so long as they are the black race. Our people are supposed to be able to live in their own home, in their own village. One would expect at least 100,000 people are in Nigeria living on crumbs in their territory to be invaded by a foreign military of La République du Cameroon, because the mineral deposit in Southern Cameroon is a prerogative to the French European nations that they can harvest in Africa, and the human being that living in that environment is of no value to them. Fellow brothers and sisters in Tiko, I stand with you. No matter whatever the circumstances, we will fight till we see the end of this crisis. We will fight. Fellow brothers and sisters, wherever you've been taken, adopted within the last 72 hours, I know that 500 you guys that have been adopted in Tiko, in Likumba, in Mutengene, and somewhere that are going on too, in the same area. It is quite disturbing. Why do the world think that the people of Southern Cameroon must be governed by a foreign nation? You can only listen to the previous Undersecretary, U.S. Undersecretary, that I don't believe a U.S. lawmaker asking a valid question, Tibu Nagy, and he will be speaking rubbish. I mean, we all went to the same school in education. We all understand the law. The fact that you have been chosen to represent doesn't mean that you can do any kind of damage you believe. If the law was systematically respected, it should be uniformly applied to every individual, irrespective of their color, their language, their origin, and wherever they came from. That should be the fundamental principles that should be universally applied. The people of Southern Cameroon fall under the same category. But anyway, thank you. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. This is the world we live, and we'll continue to live in that crisis.